You let me know. So as soon as that door closes, we're ready to go.
You are good to go.
Amazing. So as I say, it'll be as much or as little as you're comfortable to do. If you need to take a moment, take a moment.
Okay.
Complete.
Sounds good.
Okay. Ready?
Yep.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to this episode of Human Alchemy. Today's guest is Dave Pounds. Now, Dave works with many teams, companies, individuals on building resilience and leadership. And he has a fantastic program called Design for Life, which I'd encourage anyone to check out. However, the first 10 minutes of this episode with Dave may be slightly hard to hear and may even be traumatic. And Dave does give warning to this. But I think his story is one of the most inspiring and powerful you will hear. So I'm not going to spend any more time here. I'm going to pass straight over to this episode of Human Alchemy with Dave Pounds. Dave, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, Ross. You?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. Thank you so much for coming down from Leeds today. Is that correct?
Leicester. Leeds fan.
Leeds fan from Leicester. Perfect. So I got introduced to you via a friend of mine called Joey Speed, and he told me a story, and I was very keen to meet you and speak to you and understand a little bit more about it. I think before we go into your story, which is an incredible one, would you just let me know where you're at now?
Where I'm at now? Well, probably at the latter half of my middle years. I'm probably as good as I've ever been. In fact, I don't think there's any question I'm good as I've ever been. What do I mean by that? I mean, I feel more resilient and I'm happier, basically, than I've ever been. You know, I feel not just more resilient mentally, but, you know, I feel fit physically as well, which is important to my mental resilience. I'm still playing football and running and discovered this great new game called paddle tennis. Football, I kind of shuffle around at the back a bit, but, you know, still playing with lads in their 20s, which is a real privilege. So thankfully the body's holding up. But overall, you know, life has never been better. And I think the cream on the cake, as I would call it, and people talk about purpose all the time, don't they, these days? But I think I found a real sense of purpose, and we'll come on to this, I'm sure, later. But, you know, it's using my story and overcoming adversity to help others. And that just means sometimes I go to bed and I want it to be the morning the next day because I can't, you know, wait to get stuck into doing what I'm going to do the next day. So, yeah, life is great.
That's a very good feeling, isn't it? When you're excited to get up and then you're excited to get home, you're excited to get on with what you're doing. You spoke about adversity there. I think, would you be able to take me to when you were younger and the adversity you had to go through at age 12?
Yeah, and apologies to anybody who finds this triggering because, you know, I do know that a lot of the population has had some kind of trauma before the age of 18. So I had an idyllic childhood, really, and then a very unusual set of circumstances collided when I was age 12 that led to a disaster in our family. So it was May the 10th, 1976. I know what you're thinking. He doesn't look that old. And Dad was away giving a lecture. He was a professor of X-ray astronomy as a space scientist. He was giving a lecture in Durham and due back about 10 o'clock, which was about the same time as my mum, who worked a few days a week in a restaurant during the evenings. Anyway, the trains were all cocked up, getting Dad back from Durham. So he was late back. And when Mum came home, I was in my bedroom, but I couldn't sleep. So I thought I'll go and say good night to my mum. And I came down the stairs, and our stairs kind of went down halfway and then doubled back on themselves through 180 degrees to the bottom. As I got to the turning point, I saw Mum with a babysitter and a man. And that was highly unusual. And it's like, well, who is this guy? So I peeled back out of sight. The babysitter left. I heard Mum and this guy go into the kitchen, made a cup of tea, went into the lounge. I was trying to listen from the halfway point on the stairs what they were talking about. Feeling a little bit anxious, but, you know, kind of not too bad. but decided not to go down and say hello. So I crept downstairs, and the door was slightly ajar, opening to the lounge. So I kind of peeked my head round the bottom of the door a little bit, and I could see them on the settee having a cup of tea. And I stayed there for a bit, and then this man, and it turns out Mum was trying to help him. He was having some problems, and she said, well, come back to ours for a cup of tea and we'll have a chat. Well, he clearly took that as an invitation for something else, and I heard him, try it on, making sexual advances to my mum. And she was saying, you can stop that. That's not what we're here for. So I'm now thinking, I'm feeling quite anxious. So I went back halfway up the stairs, and then all of a sudden the lounge door flew open, the kitchen door, there's things banging in the kitchen and drawers being opened and stuff dropping on the floor. Then the person, which I assume is him, back in the lounge, and silence. And I'm still halfway up the stairs. There were a couple of kind of thudding noises, which I didn't know what they were at the time. I can probably guess now. And then nothing. So I went back to my bedroom. I'm now pretty scared because this is unusual. And the next thing I heard was footsteps up the stairs, and my door, which was half open, was fully opened. And all I can hear now, Ross, is panicky breathing. Well, I know that's not my mum, and I'm now thinking there's a problem, and there's a big problem. The panicky breathing was then hovering over me, sort of almost out of control. And he seemed to be there for a long time, but it was probably only a minute. Then he left my room. I could hear the other doors upstairs being opened and closed, and then footsteps down the stairs. And that's the last I heard for 2 hours. So I was in my bed, rigid. I'm now petrified, absolutely petrified. I'm on my right-hand side. I'm facing the wall. I needed a pee. I peed the bed. I haven't even blinked. My eyes open. I was pretending to be asleep when he was hovering over me. And after about 2 hours, there was a big banging downstairs, which was like banging on windows. So I gambled. It was my dad. Flew downstairs, threw open the curtain to the back garden, and my dad was there. And he gestured, "I can't get in." And because Mum's key was on the inside of the back door, which we always used, so I pointed Dad round to the front door, which was wide open, and that's why I hadn't heard anything. Him leaving, I think he'd gone out the front door and left it open. So Dad saw me in a bit of a state. We went into the lounge and we discovered a disaster scene. I'm trying to be careful with detail here, but he'd stabbed her many, many times, and you can imagine what sort of picture that paints. And even worse, if it could be even worse, my last memory before Dad hauled me out of the lounge was she was laying there with her underwear and her trousers around her ankles, where he'd had his way anyway. And it's probably a ridiculous thing to think, but my only hope is when he did that second thing, she was already unconscious. Now, we called the police, went to a neighbour's. The guy was arrested within hours and got life in prison.
Wow. Firstly, thank you for sharing that, Dave. That was not too hard to talk about, but you mentioned when we spoke before, the next day you had to go to school.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't feel like we had to go to school. Not picking holes in your words, but we were with the CID at, 2-3 o'clock, and back to school the next day. And I think it was more a case of we had no idea what to do. So, us 3 children, me and my brother and my sister, were back to school. And, bizarrely, we just tried to carry on. I never spoke to my dad about that night until I was in my mid-30s, and by then beginning to have quite a few challenges, what we would call PTSD these days. PTSD wasn't even a label. It wasn't even a thing in 1976. The best you could do was the hysterical neurosis or something like that,
Right.
which was slightly better than battle fatigue that they had after the Second World War. Ridiculous, really. And things kind of did settle down for a bit. But then later on, some years later, when I was about 19, the PTSD started manifesting itself.
And what did that manifest itself in?
Well, it would be three things really, but the main two at the time. It comes out as either horrible anxiety when I say anxiety, I'm not talking about being a little bit nervous before giving a talk at work or playing a football match or something. What I'm talking about is fear that is claustrophobic, is so all-consuming that you can't engage or focus on anything. You're just really scared, and they call them flashbacks. It's an emotional flashback to the event that caused it. So the anxiety is where, I've been for a week without a minute's sleep. I've been for a week without eating anything and being unable to focus. So that's the anxiety. What's even worse than that, but thankfully very short-lived, is panic. And panic where you kind of almost feel like you're being buried alive. What I understood later is that trauma, a bit like burnout at work, actually has an effect on the body. So it affects not just your beliefs, the psychological beliefs, it affects the brain waves. So we've all got kind of alpha, theta, beta, delta. And in particular, alpha and beta are affected by trauma and even, burnout at work. But it upsets your nervous system as well, the autonomic nervous system. So we've got parasympathetic and sympathetic, and it disturbs the balance of that. And the best way I heard that described by a psychiatrist is think of it as running a car where you're pressing the brake and the accelerator at the same time. And that's the effect on the autonomic nervous system. So over the years, I've been looking for ways to relieve all of that, not only the thinking that the world's a scary place, but, to reset those brain waves and to settle the autonomic nervous system as well.
So when you got to 18, it started to come back up. Now, when you were suffering around anxiety and dealing with this, what did you turn to for help?
Well, I went to the doctors. When it first happened, I was there 3 times in a week because, this was a week of no sleep and no eating, couldn't focus at work. And I could tell he was getting a bit pissed off with me. Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah, say what you
And
want, yeah.
The third time, they said, to be honest, Mr. Pounds, you're going to have to pull yourself together. And I sat there thinking, well, if only I'd have thought of that, I grew up in a lads environment and, my dad grew up in the Second World War and is a Yorkshireman, and I'm not saying he's unemotional, but it's kind of, grin and bear it and get on with it. So it was absolutely hopeless. And, we may talk about this later, Ross, but I don't see that the tools in the sort of mainstream medical system are a lot better than they were, 40 years ago. I think they are better, but they're not a lot better. They are still largely ineffective. They will work for some people, but it's generally either sort of tablets or therapy. And it might be a therapist in 3 months' time that you have no personal connection to you and doesn't really understand the problem. And talking therapy can be very valuable, but it can also be limited as well.
You did mention that you think mental health diagnosis has improved, but in terms of treatment is nowhere near.
Yeah, I think that, and that notion was given to me by a guy who became a friend, really, Ben Sessa, who's a psychiatrist. And he said, we are very good at diagnosing people with depression, ADHD, PTSD, but we're just not very good at treating it. And the reason Ben was telling me this, he was that was part of a talk he gave on MDMA and the potential of MDMA and other psychedelics as, I say new treatments. They're not new drugs, but we're really understanding the therapeutic power of them.
So I do want to come on to that, but before I do, I just want to ask you, how many different therapies and treatments did you try?
Yeah, well, I talk about this when I give keynotes. I counted up over 60 therapists I've seen that covered over 3 dozen therapies. If you add into that medical papers, medical research papers I've read and books I've read, the number just grows higher. The time and the cost and the miles travelled are big numbers. And I have found some golden nuggets on that journey, but most of it has been disappointing.
And something else you mentioned, I said, and as we were walking over, and you said, it's like, how did you process that? And you jokingly said, with a lot of vodka.
Mm.
But seriously, you did go to rehab at one point.
Yeah, I did. So, I think part of what's kept me going, and there have been 3 times where I've just felt so desperate. I think it's only hope that's kept me going, and I honestly thank God for that, because I'm not sure where that hope came from. But I know it was only hope that was the barrier between me and thinking, I just can't do this anymore. So I think over time, that searching was important to give me hope. But there came a point when I just thought I was exhausted of it. I was working hard as well. I'd collected some of the badges through my corporate job that life tells us to get, like a big house and a shiny car and, decent salary and all those good things, and swimming pool. And it was like I was still miserable, and I was still getting hit by the PTSD. And I was developing a growing drinking problem, especially as I'd stopped playing football and cricket, which I was very passionate about. And drinking just became, wow, this is relaxing, because I never really was a drinker. And I just developed a relationship with drink. And I think through the exhaustion of everything, I just ended up hitting the bottle for periods of weeks at a time. So it would be 24/7 drinking. So if I woke up at 5 a.m, I'm feeling so bad from the day before. I'm still feeling anxious and the anxiety is off the scale. Downstairs, pint glass, half vodka, half juice, down in one, do the same again, and go and sit in the lounge and try and find another way, research. But it always ended up the same way. Your body gets shut, your nervous system shuts down so much that I ended up every time fall down the stairs, ambulance was called by the family, in hospital, and 4 times it ended with rehab. And that happened on and off. I'd like to say it was once and I found that moment, but it wasn't. It happened over a period of years. And looking back, it was not just terrible for me, but the impact on my family was just awful. And we're beginning to talk about that now, which is really helpful. So it descended into what I would call rock bottom.
Really? And with rehab, forgive my ignorance, but what do they actually do when you go to rehab?
Well, rehab is both brilliant and limited in my view. I think it's limited because why do people take drugs, drink too much, become over promiscuous, take prescription drugs? Why do they do those things? And it's normally because they're trying to fix a pain within them. Now, what rehab doesn't do is target that pain. So it's not really, in my view, getting rid of the source problem. What it is quite good at is getting you sober from whatever it is that you're abusing. And it's very good at building camaraderie, people connection. It's quite amazing. You become so intimate with people so quickly because everybody's in there, bearing their soul. And you spend most of the day in group sessions. So there's a whole process they go through where they get you to talk about stuff. And you see the same patterns, people opening up more and more over the weeks, because you're generally in for a 4-week period. I did 5. So it is quite profound in that sense. But I think one of the important things it gave me, Ross, was twice a week they'd have somebody who used to be in that rehab centre. They would come back and share their story. And for the first week or 10 days, I got to the point where there was so upsetting because there are some incredibly upsetting stories, like I reckon most people couldn't even write them.
Really?
And I said to the therapist, I can't go to these sessions. They're triggering me too much. So they convinced me it was the right place to be. And then fairly quickly it dawned on me that I was missing the point. Point wasn't just the horrendous story they were sharing. The point was that story did exist, but they've managed to find a way to, if not completely overcome it, find a life of, meaning and peace and sobriety. And you sit there and you have literally no option but to say, mate, if you can do that, then I've got a chance. And that was really that was really powerful for me, and the first insight really into the power of sharing stories.
I think that's so inspiring, and also in terms of what you're doing today and sharing your story. But you mentioned something around trauma is trauma. People try and sometimes equate and say, you've been through that, I should probably be able to deal with this. But actually, if you're experiencing trauma, it has a similar impact on everyone.
Yeah, it does, and the bits we talked about earlier, when you go through a trauma, which is broadly something so frightening and out of your control in terms of what happens, that to me is kind of trauma. And we know now it leaves an imprint, not just psychologically, but on the body as well. Now, whatever journey you go on to get to that point, we're all feeling, in a way, we're feeling the same at the end of it. So I don't think it's very helpful or relevant to compare the starting point for that end point. So, yeah, my mum got killed. For somebody else, it might be an illness or a loss of a relative or a crime. Could be a million different things. But the end result is we feel anxiety, and that anxiety or depression or guilt probably feels the same. We can rate it as like 8, 9 or 10 out of 10, but it probably feels the same, which means we're all trying to tackle the same issue, really.
And you briefly mentioned MDMA earlier.
Mm.
You tried hundreds of different things. Which methods out there do you think actually work or help?
Well, there's probably too many to go into in this podcast here. But of the 60 therapists and all the books and therapies, I did discover a few nuggets. And what keeps me resilient? So I think of resilience, Ross, as much more than grit and guts and a defense mechanism. I think grit and guts and determination is kind of what rehab centers rely on. So almost like a willpower to get off the substance and stay off it. And I think when you can stay off it for a period of months or even a year or so, then that's just a new habit and you've kind of lost the old habit. But it does take a lot of will. In terms of what keeps me resilient, there might be a bit of that in there. A bit of that old school British, stick your chest out and carry on. But when I look at it, I've defined it now into 19 different things. That's why I say we haven't got time to talk about the 19 all today. But those 19 things, when I'm doing all of those well, I am where I am today, which is as strong as I've ever been. If I stop doing certain things, then I become a bit more vulnerable. And I'm starting to create a fertile ground for, those flashbacks, those old ghosts from the past to sort of explode into something that just takes me out of control and possibly back to drinking again. So what works? Well, I think I need a basic foundation. I want to be physically fit. My diet has to be good. I have to have enough sleep. I don't want to burn myself out like perhaps I used to. Not drinking is absolutely critical. And I still, would say I love a beer and a gin and tonic, but I don't do it because, if I drink, I generally drink every day. And even if it's just 2 or 3, but what I know now is that alcohol, if you take it every day and even in big batches, what do they call it? Binge drinking. It damages the nervous system. And when I'm suppressing my nervous system, I am creating a fertile ground for an old ghost to blow up into something that I don't want it to. So I'm just better off without it. So those are kind of environmental or foundational factors that I have to have in place. And when they're in place, I think further change is possible. So what's really key for me is my self-compassion was on the floor, absolutely on the floor. So I've had to build that back up. I was avoiding so many things. I didn't fly for 25 years. I couldn't leave the house for periods of time. I couldn't drive for periods of time. There were times when I couldn't be in a crowd because I had a fear of bumping into people. So, I just wasn't engaging in a full and rich life. I was doing a job that sometimes I enjoyed, but whether I did or didn't largely came down to the people or the level of challenge. But I've changed my job now, which has, become designed for life and keynote talking and coaching. And that's given me purpose. And for me, purpose is the cream on the cake, as well as all the other things I've spoken about. So you can see they're all pillars that give an aggregate positive impact to my resilience. But for me, purpose is doing something that matters to me and matters and makes a difference to somebody else. So I would pick those as some of the highlights. But another highlight came through MDMA, which might lead us maybe as a nice segue into that story. But did all of that make sense?
Yeah, so it is interesting because I imagine it's not like a simple thing. Do this and you'll be fine. Sort your diet out, you'll be fine. It is a combination of your overall health, so getting your diet, your sleep, your exercise, stop drinking alcohol, try and find some control and purpose are the things that jump out on me there.
Yeah, and when I talk about the fears, probably what I didn't say is I've now faced all those fears, so I've overcome that. Well, doing that gives you a sense of achievement and confidence. And of course, confidence builds your resilience, building your self-compassion. I've had to understand what that really means and work on that. So all of these things are lifting me. But I when I give a keynote, I often open up with, wouldn't it be great if we saw building our resilience as like flicking a light switch? Well, I don't think it's as simple as that, but I do see it as a skill that any of us can learn. So I think of the metaphor more like a dimmer switch, where the more you do, in my case, those 19 pillars, the more you nudge each one of those 19, the brighter that light of resilience gets. And I think that's the way to think of it. But those changes can happen really quickly, and I'm talking about weeks and months.
And the one you spoke about there, I think, is quite interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like something people would probably avoid, is taking on the things that do scare them and do put them under pressure. Because in theory, you'd think to keep myself safe, I'll keep myself away from that. But you're telling me by overcoming those things, you actually built more resilience and more strength than before.
100%. It gives you a sense of confidence and achievement, and that just, at the heart of this is neuroplasticity. Without getting too sciencey, it's the brain's ability to rewire itself. That's how it's kind of spoken about these days. But facing those fears and overcoming them, which happens really remarkably quickly, is exactly what you're doing when you're facing a fear. I wasn't a frightened person as a child. Then this event happened and I became frightened of a number of things, a whole list of things. That's still the brain rewiring itself. And I think the beauty of that, Ross, is like, wow, if that really is a thing, neuroplasticity, where else can I use it in my life? So when people talk about mindset, to me, mindset is much more than positive thinking. It's really exploring something deeply like forgiveness or kindness beyond a surface level, and then working out, I'm going to adopt that. And then it's the work to do that. And what I mean by the work is creating experiences that help that rewiring or that neuroplasticity. Because in simple terms, I'll finish with this, Ross. The way I see it is we're all very similar as human beings in a sense of, Maslow tells us we need security and to feel safe and, recognized and valued and all this good stuff through to self-actualization. So we're similar in that respect, but we're also very unique because our experiences in life are unique. You and I have had some great chats this morning and have some shared ideas, but our experiences are completely different. So our beliefs are different. I think our experiences shape our beliefs shape our feelings, and our feelings drive our behaviors. So what we're doing through Design for Life is recognizing that and saying, wow, I can rewire some stuff here, whether it's mindset or facing a fear or building my self-compassion. How do I consciously choose experiences that helps that process so I can rewire? Does that make sense?
It does. And tell me, did MDMA help you with that rewiring?
MDMA, whole different story, led to, there's a little video of me on a Netflix series, which is fascinating, called How to Change the Mind. Psychedelics have incredible promise as a therapeutic tool. And it's only fear, maybe naivety within Westminster that's stopping us progressing with that. In the UK, it's kind of getting there in America. It's legal in Australia. But MDMA, I got myself on the UK's first MDMA trial. And so it was 10 therapy sessions, 2 of which were under MDMA. They were both quite remarkable. But the one I'll talk about, you're in a warmly lit room in a hospital with 2 therapists, with nice music playing. And you lie on a bed and put an eye mask on, and you're not pushed in any direction. When the MDMA kicks in, and by the way, I think they should put this stuff in the water system because the world's problems and, wars, they would just disappear. So you're not pushed in any direction. Then after about 10 minutes, I had this vision, and I didn't have an agenda. This vision just came to me. And I know the tragedy with my mum is kind of central to why I was there. But all of a sudden, this vision, I'm in my room the night Mum was killed. It's not dark. I'm not rigid and I haven't got my eyes closed. I'm sat up in bed in pajamas, leaning back against pillows. It's warmly lit in the room. And I'm looking at the perpetrator at the end of my bed. And I said to him, and I'll try and say this without being moved. I said to him, I'm pretty sure I know what you've done downstairs. And I'm pretty sure you could kill me, but I want you to know I am not frightened of you anymore. And it just felt such a relief. And then my mum was in the room. God bless her. My mum was in the room. She sat on the edge of the bed by me, and we started chatting to this guy and saying, why have you done this? What's made you do this? Have you any idea? Because you're probably going to go to prison for a long time. You need to work out why you've done this and how you can get yourself some help. So, for the next few days or weeks, I just couldn't get rid of that question, why has he done that? And that led me to pretty much what I was describing a few minutes ago. I think something in his past, we know he was in the army. He was only 24 when he did it. My mum was nearly 40. And I don't know whether any experience in the army contributed to this or not, but I think something in his life experiences made him almost without no choice, with that mix of being highly charged sexually and rejected in the same moment. Something in his past experiences made him react almost without a choice and without any control. Now, he said when he was sentenced that he went to the kitchen to get a knife to threaten my mum to have sex with him when she turned him down. And then he blacked out. Now only he knows the real story. But the question I had in my head, why have you done this, just kept haunting me. And I think that was it that led me to understanding something in his past had made him do it. And that understanding led me to Well, he kind of had no choice. Now, people can argue about this all day long, but that's how I feel about it. And that then led me to a process of over a few weeks of forgiving him. I didn't say that to him. And it wasn't really for him. I would say that to him, I think, but it wasn't really for him. It was for me because, when I thought about it over the previous few decades, sometimes I would get really angry, and if I'd had a beer, it would be really angry. But it was a way of releasing that resentment. And I think that understanding, just in general in life, is a fairly liberating thing, and a way that, if we can adopt that mindset, we become less frustrated with people and the things they do. We don't necessarily like them, we don't have to tolerate them, but we become a bit more understanding, and that leads to a bit more real or deeper kindness and a bit more real or deeper empathy, topics that I think we understand, or we think we understand, but we should explore a bit more deeply.
That is unbelievable. And when you were in that, going through the session, you went back and it put you back in that room. Was it a sense that you were there and speaking, or was it more of like a dreamlike state?
It was very lucid, and I don't, I've never taken a banned drug before, but under MDMA, I was more lucid than I would think I'd be with half a lager or half a bitter. You feel really, really sharp and lucid. Really? And the dream or the vision was quite real as well.
Wow. Is he still alive?
We don't know that. I know what his name is now, but I don't know whether he's alive. We've got a family friend who's a criminologist who thinks he's passed away, but he'll only be in his 70s now.
All right. So now coming on to what you do with Design for Life and your purpose, really. Talk me through how you got into that.
So the turning point was when I'd sobered up from rehab. I was invited back to share my story. And I wanted to do that for the reasons I was talking about earlier. I felt that when I heard people's stories, it was really powerful. So I went down to the London Southgate Priory one evening, 120-mile round trip. Sorry, 220-mile round trip. And I shared my story, and I came out of that, there were hugs and tears and laughter and swapping of numbers. And the feeling I had when I came out, Ross, was like nothing else I'd experienced in sport, winning or losing, in business, with family, with friends. It was so different, and it was like a sense of connection, but with a real meaning behind it. And that just started a process that led me to think, this is what I need to be doing. This is what I need to be doing. And kind of makes some sense of the disaster that happened in 1976. So, what do I mean by that? Well, it's broadly sharing my story to help others. It matters to me to make a difference to other people. And when I do that, it clearly matters to them. And that's where I see my purpose. So, I'm doing that through this program called Design for Life, which is, as I say, much more than a defense mechanism. And at the moment, I'm giving keynote talks and doing coaching.
Okay, and how are you finding the lessons from your life? How are you finding them translate to people within the business? Because I think one thing we've actually slightly skipped over is you had a long career in the corporate world as well, where you got to understand how teams operate and how leadership is sort of done well and done poorly. It's an area where we cross over a lot, but where have you found what you do now massively impacts people within leadership and within the corporate world?
Good point. So I've spent many years consulting as a change manager for Volkswagen and Jaguar Land Rover and Lloyds Bank and Halifax Bank of Scotland and so on. And for me, the difference in enjoyment and achievement, it always comes down to the people and how the people are motivated and engaged. It has a direct correlation to how they perform. But the question is, how do you motivate the people? And you and I both know you get people who can do that and people who can't do that. People who want to do it but don't necessarily know how to do it. Or people who feel suffocated by the overall kind of company environment. So maybe using some of the examples we talked about, like facing fear. For me, getting back on a plane and getting back in the car and leaving the house when I was agoraphobic developed that confidence and sense of achievement. Well, I would correlate that to a business world as people need challenge at work. And if you've ever seen the challenge support matrix, where you've got high challenge and low support, you often get burnout. Where you've got high challenge and high support, you often get high performance and growth. And surely that's where most people want to be, because A, you get the sense of achievement and fulfillment. B, you're performing well, so it's kind of a win-win for everybody, the team, you and the company. But also it's building confidence. I can do that. I did that. And it's like, wow. And when you're confident, you're more resilient. But that's just one aspect. There are, in my view, 18 others.
It's interesting you bring that up. And I saw one of the largest studies on the challenge support matrix where they saw where most people are, where most managers are. And it had most managers in that bottom left corner, which is low challenge, low support.
And do they call that apathy?
The apathy zone. Yeah. And you kind of think about that and you go, God, that's quite sad, isn't it? That's where everyone kind of is, just like, well, if you do well or you don't do well. And you mentioned before as well, one of the biggest things is about just care about the people.
Yeah, it is. I posted on LinkedIn about this. I was asking, my dad was fortunate to lead the physics and X-ray astronomy department at Leicester University for many years. And they proved the existence of supermassive black holes and, became a name on the world map of space science. And I was asking him what it was about his leadership that helped the team achieve so much success. And he almost looked at me blankly like he didn't understand the question for a bright guy. And the best I could get out of him was, well, we looked after each other. And it's kind of as simple as that. But in the business setting, I've seen over the years more focus and more pressure on delivering to, numbers, targets and dates and so on. And, I understand that businesses are under pressure to make turnover and profit and, give back to their shareholders. But I just think if you look after the people, they will then, as an aggregate, do a lot more than you and the exec can do on their own. So, we talk about psychological safety, don't we? But don't just talk about it, live it. Take an interest in your people, because they will be bringing their problems to the workplace. So if you can make them feel safe, they can put their hand up and ask the daft question, and you recognise them when they do, things for the team. They feel listened to and valued. Those are going to make them feel safe, and that is going to help with resilience and performance. But I think the other key thing I'd say, going back to me finding purpose, in the workplace, so say you're doing job ABC, you probably know what job ABC involves because you do it every day, but you might be disengaged. You might think, oh, well, what difference does mine make? But my job really make, and actually my boss is a bit of an idiot. So you're going to be in the 90% of people in the UK workforce that class themselves as not highly engaged. I mean, that's a desperate stat. But if you can spend a bit of time and do a bit of analysis to really understand what difference your job makes, not just with your immediate stakeholders, but talk to them, but go second and third line stakeholders and go and talk to them and say, when I do this, what difference does that make to you? Well, it might be, it doesn't really make any difference, in which case, why are you doing it? But it might be what really helps when you do this and you get this right and it delivers on time and so on. Understand that, and you might get an increased level of why my job matters. But also, as a leader, you should be talking to each of your individuals, regardless of the company purpose and values. That individual will have their own values, and that individual will have a set of things that are important to them, even if they're practical things. Go and have the conversation. Build the relationship. Show that you care about them. You may be able to change the environment or the way they do the job so it better suits them. Well, all of those things are going to lift engagement and performance. So, they're three things that I think are important amongst a sea of other things. And, even if you think, well, we're part of such a big organization and the culture's knackered at this organization, I think you can create micro cultures and micro climates within teams. And that has got to be a prize worth going for.
Absolutely. I think you bang on as well with if you want higher knowledge sharing or if you want higher engagement, that has to start with relationship building. You want people to share knowledge. They're not going to do it if they don't know the person they're talking to. If they get to know them, they'll start engaging with them more. But what I've found with people developing things that benefit the long term, so a lot of the things that I go and talk about will be around long-term success, is that they are under so much pressure that what happens is pressure narrows your focus, brings the blinkers in, and it's very hard to think about all these long-term things when you're under pressure, in the same way that if you're knackered and tired and all of this, you're more likely to have bad food because it's just, I just need to sort it now. It's the same thing. You want to build relationships. They're like, well, I've got to sort my immediate problems out now, which is deadlines, which is targets, which is this. So there's a big job there for the managers to try and decrease pressure on people and absorb and not transfer. And I think everything you said there speaks to that. Develop long-term relationships, help people out, and we'll get there in the end. But like I said, you and I can talk about leadership all day long. What I want to finish on here is your story is incredible. If there is someone listening that has their own challenge at the moment and is worried there's not a way out of it, what would you say to them?
I get asked this a lot, and I think it would simply be wherever you are and however stuck you feel, change is possible. Change is possible. And that would be the simple message.
Amazing. Dave, thank you so much for sharing your story with me and the listeners today. It's unbelievably powerful, and you're very kind to come down and spend the time with me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. It was a pleasure.
So there we are, episode with Dave Pounds finished. I found Dave's story incredibly moving, and how he's gone from where he was to where he is now. Very, very inspiring. So yet again, thank you for making it to the end of the episode. I really appreciate it. In 2 weeks' time, the episode will be coming out with Will McLaren. Now, Will is an ex-Royal Marine, ex-Green Beret, and now he is become an entrepreneur, and he's starting an awesome company called Metrics, which is a fitness competition, I think you can call it, that is rivaling High Rocks and aiming for global expansion next year. So please tune in again and hopefully see you soon.